The dust swirled across the weathered porch of the Double R Ranch as Ryder Kincaid squinted into the setting sun, his calloused hands frozen in the act of rolling a cigarette. Something was missing, and for the life of him, he couldn't put his finger on what it was. The ranch looked the same as it had yesterday: horses in the corral, cattle grazing in the distance, bunkhouse full of tired cowboys, but a peculiar emptiness had settled over the place like an unwelcome guest. It was April 1876, in the Arizona Territory, and spring had begun to paint the landscape with tentative strokes of green. Ryder had spent most of his 30 years on horseback, the last 5 of them as foreman of the Double R. He'd faced down rustlers, survived a Comanche arrow to the shoulder, and once rode 40 miles through a blizzard to deliver medicine to a neighboring ranch. But nothing had prepared him for the strange hollowness he felt now. "You looking to burn a hole in the horizon, boss?" Sam Tucker, one of the ranch hands, chuckled as he climbed the steps to join Ryder. "Just thinking," Ryder replied, finally completing his cigarette and striking a match against the porch post. "Must be some mighty deep thoughts. You've been standing there like a statue for near 10 minutes. Ryder took a long draw on his cigarette, the familiar burn in his lungs a welcome distraction. "Just figuring what needs doing tomorrow, thinking maybe we ought to move the herd to the north pasture." Sam gave him a curious look. "Didn't Miss Delilah say we should wait another week for that?" At the mention of her name, Ryder felt a strange tightening in his chest. Delilah Evans, the ranch owner's daughter who'd taken over operations when her father passed last year. Smart as a whip with a backbone of steel, she'd surprised everyone with her aptitude for ranching. Everyone except Ryder, who'd seen her determination from the start. "Miss Delilah ain't here," Ryder said, his voice gruffer than he intended. "She's back east visiting her aunt in Boston, won't be back till next Tuesday." "I know that," Sam replied with a hint of amusement. "Whole ranch knows that. Seems you're the only one who can't stop mentioning it," Ryder scowled. "I'm just saying she left me in charge and I'm making decisions." "Sure thing, boss." Sam's knowing smile only deepened Ryder's scowl. "Just seems like you've been in a mighty foul mood since she left 3 days ago." "Got a lot on my mind is all," Ryder muttered, flicking his cigarette into the dirt. "Daylight's wasting. Those fence posts on the south line ain't gonna replace themselves." As Sam headed back to work, Ryder remained on the porch, his eyes drifting toward the house. He'd never admitted hell, he could barely admit it to himself, but the ranch felt different without Delilah in it. Less vibrant somehow. It wasn't proper for him to think of her as anything other than his employer, but he couldn't help noticing the way sunlight caught in her chestnut hair, or how her green eyes flashed when she was passionate about something. Ryder shook his head as if to clear it. He was a cowboy, plain and simple. Men like him didn't pine after women like Delilah Evans, educated and refined despite her frontier upbringing. Besides, he'd learned long ago that attachments only led to heartache. That night, Ryder sat alone in his cabin, a small structure separate from the main house but close enough that he could respond quickly if needed. The lamp burned low as he attempted to focus on the ledger before him. Delilah had asked him to keep track of expenses while she was gone, but the columns of numbers blurred before his eyes. A knock at the door provided a welcome interruption. "Come in," he called, closing the ledger with relief. "Mrs. Holly's, the ranch cook and housekeeper, stepped inside carrying a covered plate. "Thought you might want some of that apple pie I made for supper. You barely touched your food earlier." "Thank you, madam," Ryder said, taking the offered plate. "Just not very hungry tonight, Mrs. Holly's, a stout woman in her 50s who had been with the Evans family for decades, fixed him with a maternal stare. "You missing our Miss Delilah?" Ryder nearly choked. "What? No, I mean the ranch runs smoother when she's here, but I'm managing fine." "MMHMM," Mrs. Holly's hummed knowingly. "You know, she asked about you specifically before she left." Despite himself, Ryder's interest was piqued. "She did. Told me to make sure you ate proper and didn't work yourself to death." The older woman's eyes twinkled. "She worries about you, Ryder Kincaid." "She worries about all her hands," Ryder countered, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "If you say so." Mrs. Holly's headed toward the door. "Just don't forget to bring in that pie plate tomorrow, and Ryder," She paused at the threshold. It's all right to miss someone you know. After she left, Ryder sat staring at the untouched pie, Mrs. Hollis's words echoing in his mind. Miss someone. He hadn't allowed himself to miss anyone since he was 12 years old, when his mother died of fever and his father took to the bottle. By 14, he was on his own, working cattle drives and learning to depend on no one but himself. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Ryder was in the saddle before sunrise, riding the perimeter of the ranch. The physical activity and solitude usually cleared his head, but today his thoughts kept circling back to Delilah. He wondered what she was doing in Boston, whether she was enjoying her time with her aunt, if she was thinking about returning to Arizona at all. That last thought sent an unexpected jolt of panic through him. What if she decided to stay in Boston? It wasn't unheard of for frontier women to be seduced by the comforts and culture of eastern cities. The double R would likely be sold, and Ryder would move on to another ranch, another job. Just like always, but for the first time in his drifting life, the prospect of moving on didn't sit right. The double R had become more than a job to him. It had become something dangerously close to home. By mid-afternoon, Ryder's mood had soured further. He snapped at a young ranch hand for a minor mistake with the horses, then immediately regretted it. The boy, barely 18 and new to ranching, looked stricken. "I'm sorry, sir. Won't happen again." Ryder sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through his dark hair. "No, I'm the one who should apologize, Billy. You're doing fine. I'm just—" He trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "It's all right, Mr. Kincaid. Everyone says you've been out of sorts since Miss Evans left." Ryder jammed his hat back on his head. "Does the whole damn ranch have nothing better to talk about?" Billy's eyes widened. "No offense meant, sir." "Go on and finish with those horses," Ryder said, softening his tone. "And Billy, you're doing good work. Don't let my bad temper tell you different." As the days passed, Ryder threw himself into ranch work with renewed vigor, as if physical exhaustion might be the cure for his restlessness. He joined the hands mending fences, moved cattle between pastures, and even helped reshingle the roof of the bunkhouse. At night, he fell into bed bone tired, yet sleep eluded him. 5 days after Delilah's departure, a letter arrived from Boston. Mrs. Hollis brought it to Ryder as he was checking supplies in the barn. "Special delivery," she announced, holding out an envelope. "Miss Delilah wanted you to have this right away." Ryder took the letter, trying to ignore the way his heart quickened at the sight of Delilah's neat handwriting. "Thank you," Mrs. Hollis lingered. "Aren't you going to read it?" "When I finish here," he replied, tucking the letter into his shirt pocket. The housekeeper gave him an exasperated look before leaving him alone with the inventory and the burning question in his pocket. It wasn't until later, in the privacy of his cabin, that Ryder carefully opened the letter. The paper carried a faint trace of Delilah's lavender scent, and he found himself taking a deeper breath as he unfolded it. "Dear Ryder," it began. "I hope this letter finds you and the double R well. Boston is as hectic and crowded as I remembered, though Aunt Margaret's home provides a welcome sanctuary from the noise and bustle of the city. She sends her regards and reminds me that you are always welcome should you ever find yourself in Boston, though I told her the chances of Ryder Kincaid willingly setting foot in a city are slim to none." Despite himself, Ryder smiled at that. Delilah knew him well enough to understand his aversion to city life. "I find myself thinking of home often," the letter continued. "The clean air, the open spaces, and yes, even the endless work of the ranch. I've attended 2 dinner parties and an afternoon tea, and while the conversation is stimulating, I miss the straightforward honesty of our talks on the porch after supper." Ryder's breath caught. Those evening conversations had become a ritual over the past year, him reporting on the day's work, Delilah sharing her plans for the ranch. Simple, practical talks that had somehow become the part of his day he most looked forward to. "Aunt Margaret has introduced me to several suitable gentlemen," her words, not mine, "but I find Boston men pale in comparison to the men I know at home. They may have polished manners and fine clothes, but I doubt any of them could ride from sunrise to sunset or face down a stampeding herd." Was she comparing these city men to him? Ryder dismissed the thought as quickly as it formed. She meant ranch men in general, not him specifically. "I've decided to cut my visit short," Delilah wrote. "Aunt Margaret is disappointed but understanding. I should arrive home on Friday's stagecoach rather than next Tuesday as planned. Please don't trouble yourself to meet me. I know how busy you are with spring work, but I would be grateful if you could let Mrs. Hollies know to expect me. Friday, the day after tomorrow." Ryder read the letter twice more before carefully folding it and placing it in the drawer of his small desk. An unfamiliar lightness had settled in his chest, replacing the heaviness that had plagued him for days. The next morning, Ryder surprised the ranch hands by whistling as he saddled his horse. The change in his demeanor was so marked that Sam couldn't resist commenting on it. "Someone put sugar in your coffee this morning, boss," Ryder shrugged. "Just a fine day to be alive, Tucker." Sam exchanged knowing glances with the other cowboys. "Wouldn't have anything to do with a certain letter from Boston, would it?" Ryder's whistle cut off abruptly. "Don't you have work to do?" "Yes, sir," Sam replied with a poorly suppressed grin. "Just glad to see you back to your old self." But Ryder wasn't back to his old self. He felt different, lighter, more alert, as if he'd woken from a long sleep. Throughout the day, he found himself checking the position of the sun, calculating the hours until Friday's stagecoach would arrive. That evening, Ryder made a decision. After supper, he saddled his horse again and rode into town. At the general store, he ignored the curious looks of the shopkeeper as he selected a small bottle of lavender water, the same scent Delilah favored. It was an extravagance, and he felt foolish buying it, but he wanted to give her something to welcome her home. On the ride back to the ranch, reality began to set in. What was he thinking? A ranch foreman didn't buy perfume for his employer. It was presumptuous, inappropriate even. By the time he reached his cabin, Ryder had convinced himself to return the gift to town the next day. Friday dawned bright and clear. Despite his resolution not to meet the stagecoach, Ryder found himself riding toward town shortly after noon. He told himself he needed supplies anyway, and if his arrival happened to coincide with the stagecoach, well, that was mere coincidence. Main Street was relatively quiet as he tied his horse outside the general store. The stagecoach wasn't due for another hour, so Ryder took his time purchasing ammunition and tobacco. Deliberately avoiding looking at the bottle of lavender water he'd returned to the shelf earlier. As he stepped back onto the boardwalk, a commotion at the end of the street caught his attention. The stagecoach was arriving early, the driver urging the team of 6 horses through town at a brisk trot. Ryder's heart began to pound as the coach pulled to a stop in front of the hotel. The driver jumped down to open the door, and a moment later, Delilah Evans stepped out. Even from a distance, Ryder could see she was dressed in Eastern fashion, a traveling suit of deep blue that accentuated her slender figure, her chestnut hair styled more elaborately than she wore it at the ranch. She looked beautiful, sophisticated, and suddenly very out of reach. Ryder hesitated, one foot on the street, the other on the boardwalk. What if Boston had changed her? What if she looked at him now and saw only a dusty cowboy, unrefined and uncultured? Then Delilah turned, scanning the street, and their eyes met. Her face lit up with a smile that hit Ryder like a physical force. Without conscious thought, he was moving toward her. "Ryder," she called, stepping forward to meet him. "I didn't expect you to meet me." "Was in town for supplies," he said, suddenly acutely aware of his worn clothes and dusty boots. "Heard the stage coming in." She smiled up at him, green eyes sparkling with what looked like genuine pleasure. "Well, I'm glad for the coincidence." "I've missed," she paused, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "I've missed the ranch." "The ranch has missed you too," Ryder replied, then mentally kicked himself for the awkward response. A young man in an expensive suit emerged from the stagecoach behind Delilah. "Shall I see about rooms at the hotel, Miss Evans?" Delilah turned. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Harrington. As I mentioned, my ranch is only a short ride from town." The man frowned slightly. "I had hoped to see this ranch of yours before returning east." "Perhaps I could impose on your hospitality for a night or two." Ryder stiffened. Who was this dandy, and why was he accompanying Delilah home? "Of course," Delilah replied, though her smile seemed strained. "We can certainly accommodate you." she turned back to Ryder. "This is Mr. James Harrington, a business associate of my aunt's. Mr. Harrington, this is Ryder Kincaid, foreman of the Double R." Harrington extended a gloved hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Kincaid. Miss Evans has spoken quite highly of your capabilities." Ryder shook the man's hand briefly, noting the softness of the leather gloves and the lack of calluses beneath them. "Welcome to Arizona Territory, Mr. Harrington." Mr. Harrington expressed interest in Western investments, Delilah explained, a note of apology in her voice. Aunt Margaret suggested he might consider the cattle business. Understanding dawned on Ryder. This wasn't a social visit, it was business. Still, he didn't like the proprietary way Harrington stood close to Delilah, as if they shared some private connection. "I'll arrange for a buggy," Ryder said. "The stage brought your trunks," Delilah nodded. "Just two, and Mr. Harrington has one as well." While Ryder organized transportation and helped load the luggage, he observed the interaction between Delilah and Harrington. The Easterner was attentive, standing too close and finding excuses to touch Delilah's arm or hand. For her part, Delilah maintained a polite demeanor, but Ryder could see a certain stiffness in her posture that hadn't been there when she first greeted him. The ride back to the ranch was filled with Harrington's questions about cattle raising and land values. Ryder answered as briefly as possible, while Delilah filled the gaps with stories about the ranch's history and her father's vision for it. "Your father built all this from nothing?" Harrington asked, gesturing to the expanse of the Double R as they approached. "Most impressive." "He had help," Delilah replied, glancing at Ryder. "The right people make all the difference." Ryder felt a spark of warmth at her words but quickly tamped it down. He couldn't afford to read too much into casual remarks. Mrs. Hollis was waiting on the porch when they arrived, her broad face breaking into a smile at the sight of Delilah. The older woman engulfed her in a hug the moment she stepped down from the buggy. "Land's sakes, child, but we've missed you." "The place hasn't been the same." "I've missed you too," Delilah replied, returning the hug with equal enthusiasm. Over Mrs. Hollis's shoulder, her eyes met Ryder's briefly. After introducing Harrington and instructing Mrs. Hollis to prepare the guest room, Delilah turned to Ryder. "Would you mind showing Mr. Harrington around while I freshen up? I'm sure he'd appreciate seeing the operation firsthand." Though Ryder would have preferred to decline, he nodded. "Of course, Miss Evans." For the next hour, Ryder guided Harrington through the ranch, explaining the cattle operation, the breeding program Delilah's father had started, and the improvements they'd made to water access on the property. To his surprise, Harrington asked intelligent questions that suggested he'd done some research before arriving. "Miss Evans mentioned you've been with the ranch for 5 years, Harrington said as they walked back toward the house. "You must be quite devoted to the place." "It's a good operation," Ryder replied neutrally. "And to Miss Evans as well, I imagine." Ryder shot him a sharp look. "Miss Evans is a fair employer and a capable ranch owner." Harrington smiled thinly. "Indeed, she's quite extraordinary. In Boston, she had no shortage of admirers." The casual statement hit Ryder like a punch to the gut. Of course she would have admirers. Delilah was beautiful, intelligent, and wealthy by frontier standards. In Boston, surrounded by educated men of means, she must have shone like a diamond. "Miss Evans can take care of herself," Ryder said, his voice harder than intended. "Oh, I'm well aware," Harrington replied. "But even the most independent woman appreciates certain attentions. I found Delilah particularly responsive to thoughtful gestures." The familiar use of her first name and the implied intimacy made Ryder's jaw clench. "We should head back. Supper will be ready soon." That evening, Ryder sat at the dining table with Delilah, Harrington, and Mrs. Hollis, acutely conscious of his rough manners compared to Harrington's polished etiquette. The Easterner regaled them with stories of Boston society that had Mrs. Hollis enthralled and Delilah smiling politely. "You should have seen Delilah at the Winthrops' ball," Harrington said, gesturing with his fork. "She outshone every Boston debutante, despite claiming she was out of practice with dancing." "It was kind of you to rescue me when I stumbled," Delilah replied. "Though I maintain it was the fault of those slippery floors." "Nonsense. You were grace itself." Harrington turned to Ryder. "Do you dance, Mr. Kincaid?" Ryder took a sip of water to avoid answering immediately. "Not much call for dancing in my line of work." "Oh, but you should see him at the harvest festivals," Delilah interjected. "Ryder may not know the quadrille or the waltz, but he can do see-do with the best of them." Ryder glanced at her in surprise. He danced at last year's harvest celebration, but he hadn't realized Delilah had noticed. "A country dance," Harrington said with the faintest hint of condescension. "How charmingly rustic." After supper, Delilah suggested they take coffee on the porch to enjoy the mild evening. As they settled into the chairs, Ryder found himself recalling the many evenings he and Delilah had spent just like this, discussing ranch business under the stars. Now Harrington's presence created an awkward triangle, his cultured voice filling the night air with tales of Eastern luxury that made the ranch seem primitive by comparison. "I should check on the horses," Ryder said abruptly, setting down his barely touched coffee. "Thought I heard something earlier." "Of course," Delilah replied, a question in her eyes that Ryder couldn't bring himself to answer. "Don't let us keep you from your duties." As Ryder walked away, he heard Harrington's voice drop to a more intimate tone. "Now that we're alone, Delilah, I wanted to discuss the proposition I mentioned in Boston." Ryder forced himself not to listen further. Whatever proposition Harrington had for Delilah was none of his business. He had no claim on her, no right to the jealousy burning in his chest. In the barn, Ryder checked each stall methodically, though he knew perfectly well that nothing was amiss. The familiar sense of hay and horse calmed him somewhat, and by the time he finished, his emotions were back under control. As he stepped out of the barn, he was surprised to find Delilah waiting for him, a lantern in her hand casting a golden glow over her features. "Is everything all right with the horses?" she asked. "Fine, just being cautious." She nodded, then gestured toward a bench near the corral. "Walk with me. I'd like to hear how things have been while I was away." They sat side by side on the bench, far enough apart to be proper but close enough that Ryder could detect the faint lavender scent he'd missed. For a few minutes, he updated her on ranch operations, the new calves, the repaired fences, the preparations for moving the herd. "You've managed everything perfectly," Delilah said when he finished. "I knew you would. Just doing my job. It's more than that, and you know it." She turned to face him more directly. "Ryder, I want to explain about Mr. Harrington." "No need to explain," he interrupted. "Your business is your own." "But that's just it is business." Delilah's voice took on an edge of frustration. "James Harrington represents a group of investors interested in Western cattle operations. My aunt thought an alliance might benefit the Double R, but after spending time with him in Boston, I'm not convinced his vision aligns with mine." Relief washed over Ryder, though he tried not to show it. "What's his vision?" "Expansion, primarily. Buying up smaller ranches, consolidating operations. He talks about efficiency and profit margins, but there's little consideration for the land or the people who work it." She sighed. "I invited him here to see the ranch firsthand, hoping he might understand my perspective better. So far, he seems more interested in impressing me than learning about ranching." "He seems plenty interested in you," Ryder said before he could stop himself. Delilah's eyebrows rose slightly. "Does that bother you?" The direct question caught Ryder off guard. This was his chance to be honest, to tell her that, yes, it bothered him a great deal to see another man pursuing her. Instead, he shrugged. "Just an observation." Disappointment flickered across Delilah's face. "I see." She stood up, brushing imaginary dust from her skirt. "Well, it's getting late. Thank you for the update on the ranch." As she turned to go, Ryder found himself speaking. "Delilah, wait." She paused, looking back at him with an expression that made his heart race. The words stuck in his throat. How could he tell her that the ranch had felt empty without her? That he'd counted the days until her return? That the thought of her with someone like Harrington made him sick with jealousy? "Yes," she prompted when he didn't continue. "It's good to have you back," he said finally, the words inadequate to express what he truly felt. Delilah's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's good to be back. Good night, Ryder." As she walked away, the lantern light fading with each step, Ryder cursed his own cowardice. What was wrong with him? He'd faced down armed rustlers without flinching, but he couldn't tell one woman how he felt about her. The next morning, Ryder rose before dawn as usual. To his surprise, Delilah was already in the kitchen when he entered the main house, dressed in her ranch clothes rather than the fine Eastern dresses she'd worn since her return. "You're up early," he commented, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Hollis handed him. "I've had enough of sleeping late," Delilah replied. "Besides, I want to see those new calves you mentioned." "What about your guest? Mr. Harrington likes to sleep until at least 8. We have plenty of time." They rode out together as the sun crested the eastern mountains, painting the landscape in gold and rose. Ryder led the way to the south pasture where the cows with new calves were kept. Delilah rode beside him, looking more relaxed and happy than she had since her return. "I miss this," she said, gesturing to the open country around them. "Boston has its charms, but nothing compares to this. Thought you might take to city life again," Ryder admitted. "All those fancy parties and such." Delilah laughed. "After the third hour of discussing the latest Paris fashions, I was ready to trade my silk gown for denims and gallop out of there. Must have been hard to leave all those admirers Harrington mentioned." She shot him a look that was half amusement, half exasperation. "Those admirers were more interested in the double R than in me. To them, I'm a curiosity, a frontier woman with an education and a valuable property. A potential business alliance, not a person." They reached the pasture and dismounted to walk among the cattle. Delilah crouched beside a day-old calf, gently stroking its side as it nursed from its mother. "This is what matters," she said softly. "Building something real, caring for the land and the creatures on it, making a life that means something." Ryder watched her, struck by how natural she looked here among the cattle, her educated speech and refined manners overlaying a fundamental connection to the ranch that matched his own. "Your father would be proud," he said, "seeing how you've taken to ranching." "I hope so." She stood, brushing her hands on her riding skirt. "He always wanted a son to take over the ranch. I think he was surprised to find his daughter was just as capable." "I wasn't surprised," Ryder said. "Not from the moment you took charge after he died. You've got a way of seeing what needs doing and getting it done, no matter what anyone thinks." Delilah's smile warmed him more than the morning sun. "Thank you for that, and for keeping everything running while I was away. The ranch is lucky to have you." "Just the ranch?" Ryder wanted to ask. Instead, he nodded toward a nearby rise. "Want to see something? Won't take but a few minutes." She followed him up the gentle slope to where a small cluster of wildflowers had emerged after recent rains. Blues and purples and yellows dotted the green grass, a natural garden in the middle of the range. "Oh," Delilah's delight was evident in her voice. "They're beautiful. I didn't know we had wildflowers up here." "Found them while you were gone," Ryder explained. "Was checking the north fence line and saw them from a distance. Thought you might like to see them." Delilah turned to him, her expression soft. "You remembered these for me. All the way out here." Ryder shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "Just thought they were pretty is all." "Ryder Kincaid," she said, stepping closer to him. "Are you trying to tell me something?" His heart pounded as she looked up at him, her green eyes searching his face. This was his moment, his chance to tell her everything he'd been feeling. "I missed you," he blurted out, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "While you were gone, I missed you something fierce." A slow smile spread across Delilah's face. "Was that so hard to say?" "Hardest thing I've ever done," he admitted. She laughed, the sound as bright as the morning sun. "And here I thought nothing scared the great Ryder Kincaid." "Plenty of things scare me," he said, serious now. "Losing this ranch, losing my place here." He took a deep breath. "Losing you." "You're not going to lose me," Delilah said softly, "or your place here. This is your home, Ryder." "Is it?" He took a step closer to her. "Because when Harrington started talking about his proposition, I started thinking maybe things were about to change." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Is that what's been bothering you? You thought I might sell the ranch to Harrington's investors?" "Or marry him," Ryder said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Take the ranch in a different direction, one that might not include a rough cowboy like me." Delilah shook her head, her expression somewhere between exasperation and tenderness. "For a man who sees so much, you can be remarkably blind, Ryder Kincaid." Before he could ask what she meant, she closed the distance between them, reached up to place a hand on his cheek and kissed him. The touch of her lips on his scent, a jolt through his system more powerful than any lightning strike. For a moment, he was too stunned to respond, but then his arms were around her, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with a year's worth of pent-up longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Delilah's eyes were bright with emotion. "Does that answer your question about my intentions toward Mr. Harrington?" Ryder couldn't help the grin that spread across his face. "Might need a little more convincing." She laughed and swatted his arm. "Don't press your luck, Cowboy." They sat among the wildflowers for nearly an hour, talking more openly than they ever had before. Ryder told her about his childhood, his years drifting from ranch to ranch before finding a home at the Double R. Delilah shared her fears about running the ranch, her determination to honor her father's legacy while creating something that was truly her own. "I never planned to fall in love with my foreman," she admitted, her head resting against his shoulder. "It complicates things." "How so?" Ryder asked, his arm around her waist. "The other hands might think you're getting special treatment, the townspeople will talk, and then there's the question of the ranch itself, who owns what, who decides what." "Simple enough," Ryder said. "You own the ranch, you make the decisions." "I work for you." Delilah lifted her head to look at him. "And if someday we were to marry, would you be content to work on your wife's ranch?" The question caught him by surprise, not because he hadn't thought about marrying Delilah. He had, more times than he cared to admit, but because she was already thinking of practical concerns. "I reckon I would," he said after a moment. "Long as we both understood that I earned my keep by the work I do, not by the ring on my finger." She smiled and kissed him again, briefly this time. "That's what I love about you, Ryder. You're the only man I've ever met who doesn't care that I own this land." "I care," he corrected her. "I care that you love it as much as I do, that you want to build something here that lasts." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. They stood up just as Sam Tucker appeared over the ridge, riding hard. "Miss Evans, Mr. Kincaid," he called, reining in his horse. "Been looking all over for you. That Easterner is raising a fuss at the ranch, talking about leaving right away." Delilah and Ryder exchanged glances. "Guess we'd better get back," she said. They rode quickly, arriving at the ranch to find Harrington on the porch, his luggage beside him and a sour expression on his face. "Ah, there you are," he said as they dismounted. "Your housekeeper said you'd gone to check cattle, but I didn't expect you'd be gone for hours." "I apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Harrington," Delilah replied coolly. "I understood you wanted to see the ranch operations firsthand." "Yes, well, I've seen quite enough." His gaze flickered between Delilah and Ryder, noting their proximity. "In fact, I've made my decision about the investment opportunity." "And," Delilah prompted, "I don't believe your operation aligns with our investment strategy after all." Harrington's tone was clipped. "The Double R is too traditionally managed for our portfolio. We seek more progressive approaches." Ryder could barely suppress a smile. Harrington had realized that Delilah wasn't interested in him or his investors' money. "I'm sorry to hear that," Delilah said, not sounding sorry at all, "but I respect your decision. When do you plan to leave?" "I've arranged for the hotel owner in town to send a buggy. It should arrive shortly. Then we'll say our goodbyes now." Delilah extended her hand formally. "Thank you for your interest in the Double R, Mr. Harrington. I wish you success in your other ventures." Harrington took her hand briefly, his smile tight. "And I wish you luck with your unconventional management choices, Miss Evans." His pointed glance at Ryder made the implication clear. Ryder met his gaze steadily, no longer feeling any threat from the Eastern businessman. After Harrington departed, Delilah turned to Ryder with a relieved smile. "Well, that's one problem solved. You sure you don't want his investment money?" Ryder asked. "Could make expanding the herd easier." "I'd rather build slowly and keep control than grow fast and answer to Eastern investors." She linked her arm through his as they walked toward the house. "Besides, I already have the best asset any ranch could want: a foreman who cares about this land as much as I do." That evening, they sat on the porch as they had so many times before, but now Delilah's chair was drawn closer to Ryder's, their hands occasionally touching as they talked about the future of the ranch. "Mrs. Holly's brought them coffee and apple pie, her knowing smile indicating that she fully approved of this development. The hands will figure it out soon enough, Ryder said as they watched the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant orange and pink. If they haven't already, does that bother you? Delilah asked. He considered the question. No, but it might complicate things for a while. Some might wonder if they're working for you or for me. They're working for the double R, she replied firmly. Just as we both are, that won't change. As darkness fell and stars began to appear overhead, Ryder reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Got something for you. Delilah looked surprised as she took it. What's this? Welcome home present, he said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. It's nothing fancy. She unwrapped the package to reveal the small bottle of lavender water he'd purchased in town. Her face softened as she held it up to catch the light from the porch lantern. Ryder, it's perfect. She uncorked it and dabbed a drop on her wrist, the familiar scent rising between them. How did you know? Noticed you always smell like lavender, he admitted. Missed that smell while you were gone. Delilah recorked the bottle and set it aside, then leaned over to kiss him softly. Thank you. Not just for the gift, but for missing me, for being here when I came home. Always will be, he promised, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed up at the stars. Long as you want me. That might be a very long time, she warned, her head nestling against his shoulder. I'm counting on it. In the days that followed, word spread quickly around the ranch about the changed relationship between the owner and the foreman. As Ryder had predicted, there was a brief period of adjustment as the hands figured out the new dynamic. But any concerns were laid to rest by Delilah's clear leadership and Ryder's unchanged expectations for work. Spring gave way to summer, and the double R thrived under their joint care. They were married in August, a simple ceremony at the ranch with the hands, neighboring ranchers, and a few townspeople in attendance. Mrs. Hollies cried through the entire service, then served a wedding feast that people would talk about for years to come. That night, as they stood on the porch of what was now their home, Delilah turned to her husband with a mischievous smile. You know what I just realized? You never actually said you loved me. Ryder looked startled. Sure I did. No, you said you missed me. You said you didn't want to lose me. But you never said those 3 specific words. He pulled her into his arms, no longer hesitant about showing his feelings. Delilah Evans Kincaid, I have loved you since the day you stood up to that cattle buyer who tried to cheat you. I loved you when you rode out in that thunderstorm to help bring in the herd. I loved you every day you were gone to Boston, and I love you now more than I ever thought possible. There, she said, her eyes bright with happiness. Was that so difficult? Easiest thing I've ever done, he replied, and kissed her under the starlit Arizona sky. Years later, when their children asked how they knew they were meant for each other, Delilah would tell the story of going to Boston and realizing that what she truly wanted was waiting for her back at the double R. And Ryder, no longer the taciturn cowboy who couldn't express his feelings, would simply say that sometimes a man had to lose something to understand how much he loved it. But he never again had trouble saying how much he missed her when they were apart, even if only for a day. And Delilah never again doubted that she had found her perfect match in the quiet cowboy who had learned to speak his heart. The Double R Ranch prospered under their care, growing into one of the most respected operations in the territory. Their children grew up strong and capable, learning both the practical skills of ranching from their father and the business acumen from their mother. The wildflower meadow where Ryder had first told Delilah he missed her became a special place for the family, where they would picnic in spring when the blooms were at their most vibrant. And every year on their anniversary, Ryder would give Delilah a bottle of lavender water and a single wildflower, simple tokens to remind them both of the moment when a cowboy who didn't know how to say he missed someone found the courage to speak his heart, and the woman who heard the love behind his halting words came home to stay.